the Grind to Growth to Greatness podcast. The best and brightest entrepreneurs, CEOs, creators, athletes. We'll talk to them all, and we'll get the good, the bad, and the ugly on how they made it. Decoding the secrets of success. And now your host, Terry Barr.
So welcome back again to Grind to Growth to Greatness. I am Terry Barr, your host, and I have a really interesting guest today. He's actually in my hometown, per se. He's got a very interesting story. He's an athlete. He's a dad. He's a coach. He's a teacher and a husband. And we're going to kind of dive into all those things. He had a lot of success in the baseball arena, and we want to talk a little bit about that. He's got a son that's been very successful and a nephew as well. And he's also a twin. He's got a twin brother. This is the second one in a row we've talked to twins. So interesting enough. His name is Brett Wagner. I'm sorry. Kyle Wagner, his brother is Brett. And we're going to talk to Kyle about his story and how he got from where he was as a young kid in this area and how he grew up in that kind of the baseball arena, if you will, became a teacher and became a coach of a very successful coaching company here in town. But welcome in, Kyle Wagner.
Thank you. It's exciting to be here. I've followed you a little bit from a distance. You're doing some great stuff. I'm just excited to be a part of it.
Fantastic. Well, Kyle, as you know, our podcast, if you've seen any of our podcasts, we're really trying to dig into the underlying story of the success. You've had some successes along the way, and I want to talk about how that journey went for you, and we want to dig into that. So tell me where you grew up. Tell me about your family, and give us a little background of who you are.
So I've been, I live in New Cumberland is the address, but I've lived in Redland High School's backyard. That's a Lewisberry address. I've really been a Redland guy my whole life.
And that's Pennsylvania, right?
Pennsylvania. Yep. That's right. And okay. You mentioned my twin brother. I don't think you can tell the Kyle Wagner story without the Brett Wagner story. We're identical twins, and we played a lot of sports growing up. And I would probably say that, I would say that he was probably the more accomplished athlete. We both played professional baseball. He was a first-round draft pick. I was not. I was drafted 3 times. I do have that on him, but not nearly as high, not nearly as well regarded. But I think in many ways, knowing that Brett was always beside me, I was trying to almost live up to that potential. It's, I guess sometimes when you share the same DNA with someone and you see him doing things that you might not be able to do, it drives you, it motivates you. So, look, I had my fair share of success for sure. I think people would probably say I'm minimizing what it was that I accomplished. We were a part of a state championship team in high school. Ultimately, when we got into coaching, our boys, my son, my nephew, and their teammates won the 2nd state championship here locally. Mm-hmm. So we've certainly had our fair share of success, and there was a United States Little League championship that went in there also. So we had success, but if you ask about my story, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Brett and maybe how that pushed me a little bit.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like I said in the intro, we've had another set of twins on, completely different story, but very interesting. And I wanted to ask you about your twin brother, your identical twins, and like you said, having the same DNA and having that. I guess you read it in one of the articles I read. You said, it's great. I can't imagine life without Brett. But tell me about the competitiveness there. And you mentioned it a little bit about, I was always trying to be there with him. In some cases, he was a little better than I was. How did that play as a young kid? When you were growing up, before you got to the successes of Redland and Wake Forest and professional ball, was that a real positive experience, or did you find yourself competing with your brother?
I've always been an analytical guy, and I knew that and I actually had people say that they always worried about me. I mean, even friends of the family would say they always worried about how Kyle did around Brett, because Brett sometimes garnered more attention. Now, I'd also say that because we were twins and because the Wagner name achieved certain things, I actually benefited from Brett's success. There were things that were assigned to me that I didn't necessarily earn, and and yet I knew that deep down in my heart that Brett probably was the reason I got some of those accolades. There's a story I tell in college. I was at Wake Forest, and I made the all tournament team my junior year. I went 0 for 23 and made the all tournament team. And I got on the bus after the tournament, and I said to my teammates, "Do you guys realize I just made the all tournament team without getting a hit?"
Oh my God.
And they laughed, and I think in many respects, maybe my reputation or the name preceded the actual achievement, and I think, and that's probably in no small part to Brett. So I can't really say that Brett didn't push me, but also give me certain things that maybe wouldn't have come my way otherwise.
Well, and I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, you were a catcher and he was a pitcher. Is that right?
Correct. He was
catchers are they can get away with a lot because they're involved in every play, and so maybe that all tournament all-star thing was more for your defense than your hitting. But I understand that sounds like that would be something that I'd be like, I wonder how that happened. That's interesting. So mom and dad, Lewis Berry, how much were they involved with that you mentioned a couple times that you were a baseball family, that you like basketball and football, but the Wagner name, we were all about baseball. Was that something you got from dad? You guys were involved with baseball since day one, or?
Yeah, I would attribute that to my grandfather.
Okay.
My grandfather, they actually lived up in Snyder County, Pennsylvania. That went to West Snyder High School, both my mom and my dad, and they relocated for job purposes.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, everything, it was always about baseball, and I tell the story with my grandfather is, there at the end of his life, he passed away in 2015, a month after the United States Championship in that little World Series.
Yeah.
And I would, he really, at the end, he couldn't really communicate unless you were talking about things from his past, and that's how things work. And so he actually really shaped me as a reader. I started to read about his time, his era, so we could have really good conversations. But yeah, it was my grandfather, and he started the Wagners on the baseball path. And
how about that?
And then so we were just immersed in a baseball culture from the beginning.
Yeah, that's interesting. So as a player, again, you went, you were very local here in the central Pennsylvania area. You went to Redland. You and your brother went to Wake Forest. And then as that progressed and you saw that, maybe you weren't going to go far in the professional ranks. And I read a little bit about you. One of the things you said, you walked away from the professionals. What was it? I
was with the Angels for a year.
Yeah, with the Angels, yeah. But you walked away as an athlete. They weren't going to release you because they loved your brain. But you walked away as an athlete. I'm just curious what that statement meant, and what you were going through. In other words, some people hang on way, way too long, and then some people decide it's time to go. What made you decide to walk away from the Angels as an athlete?
I think more so even in 2024, but even when I was playing, I was a slave to my perception. That's a language I like to use. And I never really got beyond that. I had people telling me that we love the way you catch. We love the way you think. We're never going to release you. But we also don't think you're ever going to hit enough to be a big league catcher. So if you want to get on with your life, if you wanted to get into coaching, if you don't want to, if you're not interested in riding buses for 10 years,
right.
Potentially you want to walk away from the game. And I don't know, what would have come of me if I didn't walk away. But I just had too high of expectations. Like I needed to hit more for my own liking. And, as a coach now, if I could have seen a young Kyle Wagner, I would have been pumping him up as much as possible, telling him all the value that he brought to his team, telling him that he's more than just his bat. And there were some people that tried, but at the time I needed to hit. Like it consumed me, sitting on the end of a hotel bed, far away from your family, and just those expectations just wore me out. And eventually it just got to the point where I thought I would be a better coach than a player, and so I made a decision, and then I got into coaching. But I look back fondly on my time as an athlete. I wish I would have appreciated me more, but I was pretty hard on myself.
Yeah, that's interesting, and I'm not sure a lot of kids have that perception of themselves. I think a lot of kids think perhaps they're better than they are, or perhaps they should hang on even longer. I mean, the people, or the folks that are in the minors that you hear about, their first at bat in the major leagues over a 10-year span. I wonder how they even make it that far. I mean, there is a burning desire to play baseball at the highest level. Was that a goal for Kyle Wagner and Brett Wagner? Was that a goal for you? I need to make to the majors. That's my headlong goal. Or was that kind of the obvious path for you two because it seemed like the right one?
I put way too much pressure on myself. It was a goal. I can remember honestly, I mean this wholeheartedly. I can remember asking my brother, I said, why do people play baseball if they can't be a professional? And he looked at me and he just said, he said, Kyle, because it's fun. They enjoy the game. And it was a revelation. And this was a young kid that put a lot of pressure. Like he couldn't come to grips with why people would do something if there wasn't an end game that resulted in the highest level. And so that was strictly me burdening myself with the pressure of expectations. And I wish I wasn't that way. I wish I could have enjoyed the journey more, but I didn't really enjoy the journey as I played. And I think a lot of athletes are that way. They might not be able to verbalize it, but I certainly enjoyed basketball and football in other ways because they didn't come with those same expectations.
Yeah, that is interesting. I think you're right. I think a lot of athletes look at their journey, and every kid, and of course some of the questions I have for you are coaching related, but every kid I think that goes into a store, especially in this day and age, they play a sport and they have these dreams of, here I am, I'm 10 years old, I'm going to make it to the major leagues, or I'm going to make it to the NFL, or I'm going to make it to the NBA, whatever it is. And in America, we tell kids, you can do anything you put your mind to. And sometimes I don't think that's the truth. I don't think we're doing kids very much of we're not doing them a favor, I suppose. And so I'm curious to know if we could, transition into how you think as a coach, how you made that switch, that mindset switch. I mean, was that moment that your brother said, hey, they play it because they enjoy it? How do you make the mindset switch from a person like you that's wholly and solely motivated to do one thing and can't understand why anybody would do it if they're not focused on the Major League Baseball? How did you make the mindset from that to, how do I get the best out of the kids that are here under my tutelage? I mean, you said in your opening bio that you sent to me, your story of success is definitely investment in human capital, and I think that's awesome if that's the whole person. So talk to me a little bit about how you made the transition from, hey, this is me, ultra focused, to now I'm a coach, I need to think about the whole person.
So there's something, I believe pain is the greatest teacher. And when I got out of playing and I got into coaching, I started coaching before my children were born. And I brought I brought that perspective, and that was I coached at Elizabethtown College. I went back to Wake Forest. I coached at Wake Forest. So I was immediately coaching older athletes, and
Right.
so I had some relevant stories that they appreciated, and I could help them grow towards their goals. And some of those goals were to be professional athletes. So I know
Sure.
they appreciated me. I was close to their age. It was I think I know it was time well spent for me. I think they appreciate it too. But when I think about diving into coaching the way I consider it now,
Yeah.
beginning at that younger age, I think you have to begin with the end in mind. And what I was most concerned about was, there's nothing as painful as being told you're not good enough
Yeah.
anymore, and so my responsibility was to give those athletes the skills necessary to keep playing the game as long as possible, but the enthusiasm and the inspiration to keep showing up, because at the very end the game gets really, really hard. And
Yeah.
if I had enthusiasm and I had skill, right, I would have kept playing. So
Right.
sometimes I think coaches see those two things as mutually exclusive, where the game gets really hard, and it takes what it takes, and you need to be skillful enough so you have a spot on that roster, and then they never consider the residual effect to constant pushing and constant training, and then all of a sudden you're sitting on the end of a hotel bed at the age of 23 asking yourself, is it worth it anymore?
Yeah.
And I think that was my purpose. My purpose became, I need to give these kids the skills that they're capable of earning what they're asked to earn, but I
Mhm.
needed to make sure I did it in a way that they never stop loving the game. That was my sole purpose.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, and I don't watch a whole lot of baseball. I was a baseball player in high school and college, but I've gotten away from baseball completely. But I've noticed there's a couple players out there. One namingly, I don't know his name, but he's plays for Cincinnati. The guy that's an all world outfielder, looks like he plays with a lot of joy. And I don't know if there's a place that the athlete is so good that he just has, there's no other way but making the Major League Baseball. He's going to be there regardless of anything. But he's an example of me. Here's a guy that has all the tools and sets records, and yet you can see he's having great fun out there. And I wonder sometimes where that's gone. I mean, my son was a football player. You get to college or the pros, it's a business. All of a sudden, the focus is so extreme that you lose sight of, hey, this is a fun game. That's why we do this.
Yeah, I think you nailed it too. I think sometimes it's the culture that we grow up in. It's just this grind, grind, grind. No time to rest. Someone's doing things that you're not doing, and we just lose sight of the fact that there's got to be some joy in this. And I think I think we're seeing more of that. I think we're seeing people and coaches that understand that we can be expressive in how we play the game. We can show some emotion, and
Mm-hmm.
they take some grief from the old school folks. I mean,
Sure.
some of the old school folks don't appreciate that. There's a
Yeah.
they perceive it as disrespect to the game when
Right.
sometimes you show emotion. But obviously there's a line that can be crossed. But
Yeah.
the game is emotional, and I think we owe it to our athletes to allow them to express themselves that way.
Yeah, and I think there's a physiological issue there too. I mean, when you're relaxed and you are in the moment, relaxed, emotional, all the things that kind of go with that lots of times will create a better outcome if you're not if you're tense and you're worried about hitting and you're struck out 3 times and all of those things. If you're not going up at every at bat with, hey, this is a new life for me, I'm going to go do the best I can, I'm going to enjoy this, that kind of thing. Then I think can be a physiological problem there for a lot of athletes. I think golf is similar to that. Golf, if you get all jacked up in golf, you're not going to play well. And so there's something to be said to that. But I get what you mean. The old school in any sport is always going to look with a jaded eye there for sure, I'm sure. So, so I was interested to know a little bit about initially, I know we talked about a little bit. Tell me about the relationship with your twin now. I know you guys are involved with Go Wags Baseball. I'm assuming that's a company. It's a coaching / team / training company. You have a team, correct? Tell me about that and how you guys work together on that, do you work together? I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, we started that in 2009. So I was the head baseball coach at Redland from 2000 to 2008, and my brother came to me and he said, "It's obvious that what you're doing is successful. Your guys are committed to it. They seem to like it. A lot of your techniques are unconventional. You think you can scale that on a larger scale through Central Pennsylvania?" And so we decided to do it. We did it from 2009. We actually sold it in 2016. We have teams that still play under our banner.
Okay.
But the actual in-house facility existed for 7 years. And in that time, we coached 3 first-round draft picks. We coached over 40 Division I athletes. I would like to say that Central Pennsylvania baseball, it excelled. There was, for those that aren't from the area, Redland High School and Cedar Cliff High School are rival high schools in the same district, and we were 1 win away from meeting in the state finals.
How about that?
And that was a lot of, almost all Go Wags kids. So we took a ton of pride in growing all of Central Pennsylvania. That was our rising tide lifts all boats kind of mindset. And so I was definitely more the coach. Brett was a little bit more the athlete, where he would certainly do it, but I think he would probably say this is true. He was more invested, I guess, in his son and those athletes, where I was trying to take a much broader picture with all the athletes in there. I think he would say that was true.
Well, and that's one of the things you talked about. You talked a little bit about your relationship, and you just said it with your brother and his son, your relationship with your son. And from a coaching perspective, you were his coach and also his dad. And you talked about pardon me, I lost it.
Oh, you're good.
But you talked a little bit about, it was in your thing, the outside view. I was interested to hear a little bit more about the outside view and how you had to step back and kind of get the broad picture, but also you had to be dad as well. And how I think a lot of people get into coaching that either don't know a whole lot about the sport, or they're good intention, but they get in because their kids are there and they blow the thing up. And I'm wondering how you decided, or how you handled that with your son and the team coaching dynamics there.
Yeah, so I came up with that language. I wrote a book, How the River Cats Won, in 2019, and that was after I reflected on my experience at Go Wags, and specifically coaching my son Luke, his team called the River Cats. And basically what I said was, a dad coach is he plays the role of undercover dad, where he's a coach in name, he's the head coach, and yet if your son has ability at all, that you're trying to be an honest mirror, right? Yeah. You're trying to give him honest feedback from a coach, and yet dads are supposed to love their kids unconditionally. They're supposed to be supportive at every turn, and so you've got this conflicting emotional state of how do you satisfy both of these circumstances, and both of them need addressed.
Yeah.
So what I came up with was the inside view and the outside view. The inside view is this view where you are solely focused on one thing and one thing only, and that's the dad. I mean, the dads are looking out for their kids' best interest, as well they should.
Sure.
And then the outside view is more of a unemotional, collective. Hands off, like treat everyone the same, make sure everyone gets opportunities, and that's a really difficult thing to navigate.
Sure.
What I was told, was people appreciated the fact that I coached their kids as hard as I coach Luke, and I think my credibility in the game allowed for that.
Mm-hmm.
I think they appreciated my message. And I remember after a practice one time, Luke said, "Man, Dad, you were hard on Shaq." He was one of our players. And he said,
Mm-hmm.
"You were hard on Shaq." And I said, "Was I harder on Shaq than I've been on you?" And he thought, and he said, "No." And I
Mm-hmm.
said, "Well, that's what they appreciate, Luke. They know that I'm going to give them every ounce of effort I'm giving you
Yeah.
because you're important to me. I mean, I love you unconditionally, and I'm gonna be honest with them. I'm gonna encourage them. But I think that was the allure and the attraction of the River Cats is that you got an honest but encouraging message, and that's what I tried to communicate.
Yeah, that's interesting. Um, Tell me about, I mean, based on that, tell me about when when kids came up through the ranks and you dealt with them that way and you were honest with them and you were hard on them as much as you were your son. Um, and then you have parents that perhaps, that was more of an all-star team, I understand. So the abilities were much different. But what advice would you give good intentioned parents that want to see their kids participate? And then what advice would you give good intentioned coaches that maybe don't have the intellectual capabilities based upon baseball like you do, the history and the name and the experience and all that? What advice would you give a parent, and what maybe you give that advice now, but and what advice would you give coaches as they're coaching these young people up in a sport that they're passionate about, but perhaps don't have as much as they need?
The first thing I thought about is this idea of humility wins. I think so often what coaches and parents do is they create these silos on these teams, and I was always a big proponent of any message that I was sharing with the athletes. I wanted the parents within earshot. Now,
Mm-hmm.
I believed in me. I believed in my message,
Sure.
but I wanted the parents there. I wanted the parents there because if I said something that might have contradicted a different coach, or maybe it was something that they needed clarification on, that we could have a conversation. I
Right.
think so often we distance parents from the coach because we say it's the responsibility of the athlete to engage in these conversations.
Right. Right.
Well, look, that's true, right? But even professional athletes have agents to do some
Sure.
of that negotiation for them, and it's
Yeah.
really hard for a young athlete to communicate. So I was always willing to have those conversations with the parents, and so a message to a coach would be, if you're going to have conversations with your athletes, and if you think what you're sharing is of importance, why wouldn't you want mom and dad there to hear that message? Why wouldn't you want to tie them in so everyone is emphasizing the same ideas? I mean, I don't want people talking about what it is I'm telling them behind closed doors. Like I want to get that open. I want to get that out in the open so we can discuss it.
Yeah, and a
So
lot of times kids don't have a perspective of what you're saying either. And if a
right,
parent's hearing the same story, they may be able to talk to their kids and say, "Yeah, I heard the conversation, and here's what he's trying to say." And I think that's in most cases that's going to be something that makes a lot of sense. And I think a lot of coaches want, either they don't know enough about the game or they don't know enough about the coaching. They don't want to necessarily have everybody here. They have some sort of wall around their kids, and I think that creates some anxiety if the kids are not sure how to talk or how to engage with a coach, and worries that they have in those things. What advice would you give parents that say, my kid doesn't quite get like what I think he should get, maybe playing time or attention or what have you? What kind of advice do you give parents that say, they come to you and say, "Hey, tell me what's going on"?
This episode of Grind to Growth to Greatness is brought to you by Terry Barr, Distinctive Real Estate, advising families across Pennsylvania and Northern Virginia for over 15 years. Visit the website at terrybarrealestate.com.
So I mentioned to you, I'm putting together this coaching
Yeah.
series, coaching beyond the X's and O's, and
Mhm.
there's a video in there that I have called prediction and error.
Mm.
And the one thing I would tell the parents is that, if you look at a coach's perspective and a parent's perspective, a coach would be what Philip Tetlock is the guy who wrote a book called Super Forecasting, and he broke things down into what he called foxes and hedgehogs. And he said foxes make really good decisions because they have a bunch of things to rely on, whereas hedgehogs make bad decisions because they only see one big thing, and then that one big thing has a tendency to obscure reality. And
Yeah.
what I would tell parents is, look, coaches make mistakes. We all make mistakes. I mean,
Sure.
any coach that has ever engaged in coaching has made mistakes. But what they are entitled to is they are entitled to making decisions because they are weighing all of these things. They have all the athletes, they have all the relationships, they have at Go Wags, we labeled kids sampling, specialized, invested. It was a way to try to discern how committed they were to a sport. So, those are all things that coaches engage in, that they're trying to evaluate. Is a kid safe? Does he have the skill set? Um, what relationships are at stake here if I play him, if I don't play him?
Right.
And so often parents are very focused on that one big thing, and
Yeah.
that one big thing is often their enjoyment of the game. And it's true, and it needs to be evaluated, and you need to have conversations with coaches, but sometimes kids don't always let on to their parents, and sometimes the coach actually might have a little bit of insight that the parent
Sure.
might not.
Yeah.
So that's the language I try to use.
Yeah, that's good stuff. That's good stuff. So you're a teacher at Redland. You're still a teacher at Redland, I see, right?
I am, yeah.
And I see that you do some online stuff. I've watched some of your. It seems like you have a voracious appetite for information, for perspective on things. And I looked at something you did on the Heisman Trophy, which was interesting, very, related to statistics and forward thinking and culture and all of those things. How do you take your baseball skills, your coaching skills, and how does that translate to your teaching? Because I think you have a very interesting approach to teaching. And one of the things you said is about metrics. You were talking about the only metric that really matters to me is, are they excited to show up? And I guess from a teacher's perspective, tell me about how that you bring all of that information and all of that knowledge from baseball and what you've gone through into your classroom.
So there's a quote that I love. It's one of my hashtags. I try to collect hashtags, I guess. For a couple of years ago, I didn't even know what a hashtag was. I can't say what it was, but I was like, hashtags are relevant. I can appreciate hashtags. So it's this idea of intent precedes content. And, how does how I teach relate to how I coach? Every athlete that I've ever coached willingly signed up for my sport.
Right.
And the model that I use is I use a 3-door model where the first door is the actual door. You got to get them in your presence. And then the second door is what I call the attentional door. You got to give me your eyes.
Okay.
And the third door is the intentional door. You got to give me your heart, and you got to give me your ears, right? And so the magic happens when you get those people through that last door, that intentional door. And so with respect to my practices, I wanted to make practice so exciting that they were just so anxious to get there, and it was the highlight of their day, and they're telling their mom and dad, I can't wait for River Cat practice. And then once I got them there with enthusiasm and excitement, the rest became almost like self-evident. Like we couldn't help but get better. Like we just had a ton of fun, and I worked hard at organizing my practices. But when as a teacher, and I actually had a student tell me I wasn't nearly as good as a teacher as I was a coach. So I had some reflection to do. And I think ultimately that's where I landed, is that I wanted to try and remodel my classroom into that intentional door. What could I do to get them excited to show up? And then if I got them excited to show up, my hope was that the rest of it would take care of itself.
Right.
And obviously it doesn't. Obviously teaching is more than inspiration. I mean, obviously we gotta share information to them, but I think so often when teachers err, I think they err on the side of information over inspiration,
Sure.
and I was trying to flip that. That was what was true for me as a coach, and I wanted to flip it as a teacher. So, um,
I mean,
I,
everybody wants to be inspired. I
yeah,
mean, let's face it. That's one of the reasons I do this podcast. You know, I sat on the other side of the table for years, for 30 years, talking to individuals about either finance and their retirement funds, or and for the last 15 years, what house they want to buy, what the details of that. And I hear these stories, and I'm inspired by the stories that I hear. Every kid wants to be inspired. They want to look at a teacher or a mentor and say, that's the person I want to be like, or that's what I want to do when I grow up, so I agree with you 100%. My wife is a principal at a school, and she's talking about inspiring kids to be better. Somebody that's not vocal or somebody that's not engaged, if we can inspire them to be better, they're going to learn better. And I love that about what you're doing. It's inspirational from my standpoint.
yeah, I try. I get attached to the kids, and it's truly why I enjoy doing it. You try to see
Yeah.
every kid is on their own journey with their own story, and not a year goes by where no less than 10, 15 kids really have an impact on me, and that's changed. I'm sure some of it comes with age and being comfortable in who you are and how you want to go about doing it. But I really enjoy how I model my classes now. I really enjoy listening to them, and I think if they had an opportunity, I think they'd say they learned stuff along the way too. I think it's a mutual benefit for all parties.
Yeah. Now I want to back up a little bit. I want to go back into coaching a little bit because what I read in your bio and some of the information I saw is you also have a daughter. Her name's Grace, and you said you did some coaching with her, and you were learning how young girls think and how ladies think, and trying to get a grip on that. Tell me about that. Are you still coaching girls sports, and how have you found that over the last few years that you've been doing that?
I love coaching girls sports. I never knew I would until I did. I coached field hockey for the last 2 years. My daughter is a sophomore at Queens in Charlotte.
Okay.
I volunteered because they needed a coach. Now, I wasn't the head coach. I did it with a good friend of mine at Redland, Heather Wolf.
Okay.
So last year was my second year. I'm not coaching this fall. I just
Okay.
literally sent the coach a text. I'm going to coach baseball instead this fall, but I still coach softball.
Okay.
And if I'm being honest, I actually think I prefer coaching girls' high school sports over guys' high school sports.
Interesting.
They hear everything, and that's a good thing, right?
Yeah.
For
Yeah.
coaching them. Now it's the I guess the phrase is they're easier to coach, harder to manage. I think that's probably true. I mean, they care immensely, and because they care immensely, relationships can be more tenuous.
Yeah.
You have to be very aware of those relationships,
Yeah.
and the spoken word goes a long way, and that's
Sure.
that's good news, and that's the bad news with the girls. So,
Yeah.
but I love it. I love it.
That's funny. As a girls coach, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up Caitlin Clark. What do you think about that whole situation?
I teach a class, sports statistics,
Yeah.
and we actually engaged in a Caitlin Clark commentary. I think she's phenomenal. Like
Yeah.
she was the first girl athlete, and I turned on. I have the Big Ten Network, and I saw that Iowa basketball was on,
Yeah.
and I wanted it to be the girls, and it was the guys, and I turned the channel, and I was like, I mean, I honestly wonder how many times that situation arises where
Yeah.
you prefer the female version of the sport, and that's what she's doing. She's creating some excitement and buzz. She's phenomenal. I mean, if you
Yeah.
watch her, it's absolutely extraordinary what she's doing.
Yeah. I've been disappointed in the response by the powers that be in the WNBA. I just think she's such a draw. I mean, I've never watched women's sports outside of the Olympics ever. And, I watch the clip every day on, whatever, on Instagram or whatever. When she pops up, I flick over there and watch what she's doing. I think it's phenomenal. It's going to give young women certainly a boost in all sports, but I think it's inspiring as well. It's bringing a lot of attention to there. So that's interesting that you say that. So I want to thank you for coming on here. I've got a couple other questions for you. I'm big on, what advice you give, and we talked a little bit about advice. But if you had the attention of the United States for 5 minutes, and you had the mic and everybody was listening, from the world we live in and the things that we're going through as a country, you and I don't have the ears of the United States, but if we did, what would you tell people? What would be your message as a coach, teacher, dad, husband?
So I think people just love being right. I think it's addictive. I think it drives so much of our thinking. It engages our reward system. So I have a hashtag: Be Less Wrong Tomorrow. And the idea is achieve enough to be credible and doubt yourself enough to remain relevant. And so I'm a curious guy by nature. There's so much that interests me and fascinates me, and when somebody says something that I don't agree with, my first instinct isn't to jump down their throat and tell them why they're wrong. My first instinct is to say, what do they see that I don't see?
Yeah.
And there are sometimes I can't come to grips with where they're at and what they see. I want to share my view and what it is that I see.
Yeah.
But people don't walk around the earth like saying to themselves like 90% of what I think is wrong. Like that's not
Right.
how people operate. They believe what they believe for a reason. And one of my mentors is Abraham Lincoln. I think he's one of our country's greatest leaders, and Lincoln was famous for that. Famous for saying that, if you lived in the North, you would think like the Northerner. If you lived in the South, you would think like a Southerner. And how are you going to impose your views on people if you don't walk a mile in their moccasins, if you don't understand the culture that they come from? It is we are a society that is curiosity deprived, and I think our news media does a lot to enforce it. It creates echo chambers, and I would just say, tell my students all the time, your awareness goes your awareness goes where your energy flows, or something to that effect. And we've got to guard what we allow in, because it really does set in motion a tidal wave of anger, of resentment, of hostility. So that would be my message. It would, try to be more curious.
Yeah, that's great. I was just looking at. I almost finished with the book. I just finished J.D. Vance's book, incredible book on where he grew up, and you talked about having the mindset of someone in the South or the mindset of someone in the North, and for him it was a mindset of the poor, and what a book talked about him going from complete poverty in Kentucky to now the vice president candidate. And it's a great book. And I'm through a book called Scarcity Brain, Michael Easter, and I don't necessarily agree with all of his views on evolution and some of the other things, but it's interesting, some of the views he has on the brain and what we do to put ourselves in a position to be right and those kinds of things. So what books are you reading? I know you're a big reader. I saw something on Facebook. You just got something on the bison, the United States bison, but tell me what books you're reading and what you enjoy reading about.
Oh my gosh. So The Accidental Presidency is a book I'm reading now. The 8 presidents that took over by accident, 4 from assassination, and 4 from, what I forget. Oh, just death.
Oh, yeah.
Untimely death. I constantly go back and forth. The Myth of Normal is a book, Gabor Mate, who I love. You mentioned Michael Easter. He wrote a book called The Comfort Crisis.
I just finished it about 2 weeks ago. Loving it.
The Comfort Crisis is one of those books. I'm a big Nassim Taleb fan.
Okay.
Skin in the Game, Anti-Fragile.
Yeah.
The Black Swan. I try to. I don't read a book from beginning to end. I read it and I bounce back, almost like trying to create dialogues between books to see, how would a certain, I mean, that's what we like, right? Like we love conversations when you got 7 people around a table and you're bouncing ideas back and forth. So I'm always back and forth between books, and my curiosity changes. I'll go into to fits where I can't get enough of baseball because I want to work in Cooperstown when I retire. So I'm constantly reading about baseball, and then I'll get into the Heisman Trophy, and then I'll study the Heisman Trophy. But I try to figure out why people think the way they think, and I think that's one of the things I try to explore as often as possible.
Yeah, that's great. And then the last question I have: who do you have in your life growing up today that you would call a mentor? Who do you go to for your advice? Bounce things off. I know we can, like you said, we can get caught up on our own advice, caught up in our own beliefs and whatever, but I have a couple different mentors I go to, and I was just curious what your, what if you have any mentors in your life now, and how often, what's your schedule like? Do you go and see them on a consistent basis, or how you put that in your life?
So there's a guy that does a podcast, 1% Better, out of New York.
Yep.
Joe Ferraro, he called someone a reverse mentor, someone that's actually younger than you that you go and seek advice for. There are 2 teachers at Redland, Heather Wolf and Kate Jackson. Okay. Kate actually is now a administrator, but they're both younger than me, but I go to them for advice. They're great. 2 older than me. They're not older. I mean they are by age, but I don't see them as older. 2 friends, Scott Kubler, Greg Young, are 2 guys that I'll go to. I'll bounce ideas off of Tom Pfeiffer. I think you might know Tom. Tom's he's the athletic director at Redland now, and Mitch Paul, and Brett, of course, my brother. I mean, we're really close, and so I guess I'm sure I'm leaving some out, but those are probably the ones that come to mind when I think about who I bounce ideas off and where I get inspiration. Yeah,
I agree. That's great. Well, listen, I want to thank you for coming on. I know we talked about this for a while, and it was great that we found some time to do this. We have a lot of different eclectic guests, and you're just a great addition. I've had another baseball coach on, was a friend of mine from high school. He coaches at Michigan now. And great perspectives on both sides, different and yet really, really informative. And I know you had a great story. I know your brother Brad. I eat his ice cream once in a while, and he's got an interesting story as well. But thank you for coming on. Thanks for sharing your insights. Is your book? Well, your book is on Amazon, Kindle. I got it on Kindle for free. So I started reading your book. And is there the other book that you have? You said you have 2 books. What's the other book that people can buy?
Well, the Green Light Hitting one it was a baseball specific book.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a lot of the baseball people like it. We had success with it, but that thing is so darn expensive. Anyone that wants that, I'll just give it away.
Okay.
Well, the pictures are they were in color and they were too expensive. But yeah, How the River Cats one is on Amazon.
Yeah. Well, I just got that and I'm working my way through that. So thank you for that. And thanks for coming on. And I hope you get a chance to see your episode come out in a couple weeks. But we love stories like this. We love the journey. We love hearing the details and how people think and what gets them from A to Z. So thank you, Kyle Wagner, for coming on our show.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Okay, tune in next week for another great guest. This was Kyle Wagner of Lewisberry, Pennsylvania. He was a professional baseball player. He went to college at Wake Forest. He's got a great family, 2 successful kids, and he is one successful guy that thinks outside the box, and we've been excited to have him. So tune in next week for another episode of Grind to Growth to Greatness. We'll see you then. Welcome to Season 2.
You've been listening to the Grind to Growth to Greatness podcast. Our passion is to talk to the brightest entrepreneurs, CEOs, creators, athletes, anyone who's made it, and dive into their struggles, their successes, and their secrets. We hope you've enjoyed the show. If you did, make sure to like, rate, and review. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, you can find us on Facebook and Instagram at Grind2Growth2Greatness. See you next time.